After nearly a month in the hospital, my son gave my house to his in-laws. When I came back, he said, "It's no longer yours. Don't come in." A week later, what I did left them all speechless. Okay, gather round, because what I'm about to tell you, it's a story I never thought I'd live to tell. Can you imagine looking death in the eye, crawling back from the brink, only to discover your own son has stolen everything, your house, your legacy, your very identity? And then, when you thought you'd lost it all, a cold, hard rage sets in, and you realize they have no idea what's coming for them. Just last month, I was face down in a hospital bed, the sterile white ceiling blurring above me, wondering if I'd ever breathe free air again. 28 days. That's how long I spent staring at those antiseptic walls after a stroke nearly took me out. All I wanted every single agonizing second was to stand right here, in front of the house on the lake that I built with my own 2 hands over 30 years ago. The yellow taxi idled, its engine a low, impatient hum. My hand, still trembling slightly, a souvenir from that stroke, fumbled a crumpled 20 to the driver. I grabbed my small duffel bag, my entire life packed into one little carry-on, and stepped onto the driveway. The late afternoon sun hit the cedar siding, making it glow a warm honey color. I took a deep breath, expecting the crisp scent of pine needles and lake breeze. But instead, I smelled cigarette smoke. Cheap, acrid, unmistakably not mine cigarette smoke, wafting from my front porch. A frown creased my brow. My doctors told me to take it easy, to avoid stress, but my heart was already hammering against my ribs. I walked up the stone path, each step a small victory over my weakened legs. The garden, usually immaculate, was a mess. Weeds poked through the flower beds my late wife Martha had tended with such love. But I pushed it aside. I just needed to get inside, sit in my leather armchair, rest. I reached the front door, the heavy oak door I carved myself. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys. The brass key, worn smooth by decades of use, felt familiar and comforting in my hand. I slid it towards the lock, ready for that satisfying click of the deadbolt. But the key didn't go in. My stomach dropped. I blinked, wiping sweat from my forehead, and tried again, jamming the metal against the cylinder. It wouldn't fit. I leaned in closer, squinting through my glasses. The antique brass hardware was gone. In its place, a shiny digital smart lock with a keypad and a camera lens stared back at me like a robotic eye. What on earth? I whispered, confusion swirling. Had Brandon changed the locks for me? My son, Brandon, was always talking about modernizing the house. Maybe he thought a keypad would be easier for me after the stroke. Yes, that had to be it. I felt a surge of affection, mixed with irritation. He should have told me. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open from the inside. I took a step back, startled. Standing in the doorway of my home was a man I barely recognized at first. He was heavyset, with a red, blotchy face and a stomach that spilled over the waistband of his sweatpants. Took me a moment to place him. Jerry Shepherd, my son's father-in-law, Tiffany's dad. But it wasn't just his presence that froze the blood in my veins. It was what he was wearing. Jerry was wrapped in a navy blue silk robe. My robe. The one Martha had saved up for months to buy me for our 40th wedding anniversary. The one I only wore on special occasions, because I wanted to preserve the feeling of her hug. It was stretched tight across his shoulders, a grease stain clearly visible on the lapel. And in his hand, he held a ceramic mug. My mug, the one that said "World's Best Grandpa." Given to me by my grandson 5 years ago. Steam curled from the top, carrying the smell of my expensive hazelnut coffee. "Can I help you, buddy?" Jerry asked, his voice rough and dismissive, looking at me like I was a door-to-door salesman. "Jerry," I stammered, my voice weak. "It's me, Augustus. What are you doing here? Why are you wearing my robe?" Jerry took a slow, noisy sip from my mug, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, it's you," he drawled, a cruel twist to his lips. "Tiffany said you might show up eventually, though we didn't think they let people out of the loony bin this early." Loony bin? I straightened my back, trying to summon the authority I used to command on construction sites. "Move aside, Jerry. I'm tired. I want to go into my house." Jerry let out a wet, wheezing laugh. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking my path entirely. "Your house? You really are confused, aren't you, Gus? This isn't your house anymore. It belongs to family now. And looking at you, you don't look much like family. You look like a liability." My hands clenched into fists, the tremor in my left hand getting worse. "What are you talking about? Where's Brandon? Let me in." Jerry didn't move. He just smirked. "Brandon isn't here and you're trespassing. Now I suggest you turn around and limp back to wherever you came from before I have to get nasty." I stepped forward, a wave of pure rage momentarily overcoming my weakness. "I built this house, you son of a b. Get out of my way." I reached for the door handle, but Jerry moved faster than I expected for a man of his size. He shoved me, his hand, still holding my coffee mug, slamming into my chest. Hot coffee splashed onto my shirt, burning my skin. I stumbled backward, my cane slipping on the stone. I fell hard onto the concrete porch, pain shooting up my hip. "Whoa there, old-timer," Jerry sneered, looming over me. "Don't make me call the cops. Or better yet." He turned his head toward the hallway and whistled. Buster! Get him! My heart stopped. Buster was my dog. My 12-year-old golden retriever. My best friend since Martha died. He'd been staying with Brandon while I was in the hospital. Hearing Jerry call him like an attack dog made me sick to my stomach. Buster came trotting out, his tail wagging low, his muzzle gray with age. He looked at Jerry, confused. Then he saw me lying on the ground. Buster let out a happy yelp and bounded toward me. He didn't attack. He buried his face in my neck, licking the coffee off my chin, whining with pure, unadulterated joy. He smelled like he hadn't been washed in weeks, but it was the best smell in the world. "Hey boy," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes, burying my hands in his fur. "You remember me?" Jerry looked disgusted. "Stupid mutt," he muttered. He stepped out onto the porch and, without a second's hesitation, kicked Buster in the ribs. "Get off him, you useless rug." Buster yelped in pain and scrambled away, cowering behind a porch column. That was the moment something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the robe. He had kicked my dog. He had hurt the only innocent soul left in this family. I struggled to sit up, my vision blurring with red-hot anger. "You touch him again, Jerry, and I swear to God I will." "You will what?" Jerry challenged, stepping closer, casting a long shadow over me. "You can't even stand up, Gus. You're pathetic. Look at you. A week ago you were drooling in a hospital bed. Now you think you can give orders." I tried to grab my cane, but Jerry kicked it out of reach. It clattered down the driveway, landing in the dirt. Suddenly, the sound of a powerful engine cut through the tension. I turned my head. A massive black Ford F-150 pickup truck pulled into the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. It was my truck, my pride and joy, the truck I kept polished and tuned to perfection. The driver's door opened, a surge of relief. It was Brandon, my son. He would fix this. He would see his father lying on the ground, bleeding and humiliated, and he would throw this intruder out. "Brandon!" I called out, my voice raspy. "Brandon, help me!" My son stepped out of the truck. He was wearing a suit I had never seen before, something expensive and Italian cut. He looked at me lying on the porch. He looked at Jerry standing over me in my robe. He looked at the terrified dog. But he didn't run to help me. He didn't look angry at Jerry. He just sighed, a look of profound annoyance crossing his face, as if I were a piece of trash that had blown onto his lawn. He walked around the truck to the passenger side and opened the door. Tiffany, his wife, stepped out. She was wearing sunglasses and holding a designer handbag. She lowered her glasses, looked at me and wrinkled her nose. "Ugh," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I told you we should have changed the gate code, Brandon. Now we have to deal with this scene." Brandon walked up the path, stopping a few feet away from me. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He just looked down, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here? The hospital said you were being discharged to the care facility. You weren't supposed to come here." "Care facility?" I managed to pull myself up to a sitting position, leaning against the pillar. "This is my home, Brandon. Why is Jerry in my house? Why are the locks changed? Help me up." Brandon exchanged a look with Tiffany. She crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently. "Dad," Brandon said, and for the first time he looked me in the eye. "We need to explain something to you, and you're not going to like it. But you need to understand that this." He gestured to the house, the garden, the lake view. "This isn't yours anymore. We made some decisions while you were incapacitated. For your own good." "For my own good?" I repeated, looking at Jerry, who was now cleaning his teeth with a fingernail. "Yes," Tiffany chimed in, stepping forward. "We sold the truck to the business, transferred the deed, and moved my parents in to watch the place. You require specialized care, Gus. Expensive care. So we handled your assets." I felt the world spinning. My truck, my house, my dog, my life. You stole it," I whispered. I stood there, swaying slightly, leaning on the pillar, looking at the two people who were supposed to be my safety net. Brandon, my flesh and blood, and Tiffany, the woman he chose. But my eyes didn't lock onto their faces. They locked onto her neck. Resting against her throat, shimmering in the afternoon light, was a string of pearls. My breath caught in my throat. Those weren't just any pearls. Those were Martha's pearls. I bought them for her in 1984, the year we broke ground on this property. She wore them to every anniversary, every Christmas, and she had asked me to keep them safe. Seeing them on Tiffany, a woman who had never shown Martha an ounce of respect while she was alive, felt like a physical slap. It was a desecration. I took a step toward her, my hand trembling as I pointed the cane. "Take them off," I demanded, my voice low and shaking with a mix of rage and grief. "Those belong to your mother. You have no right to wear them." Tiffany didn't even flinch. She just touched the necklace lightly, a smirk playing on her lips, as if she were touching a trophy she'd won in a contest I didn't know I was playing. She looked at Brandon silently, commanding him to handle the situation. Brandon stepped between us, his broad shoulders blocking my view of the front door, effectively walling me off from my own life. I looked up at him, searching for the little boy who used to hand me tools while I worked on the deck. but that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger in an expensive suit. Dad, stop it, Brandon said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. We need to be realistic. I spoke to Dr. Evans at the hospital. He said the stroke caused significant cognitive damage. You're confused, Dad. You're not thinking clearly. You can't live alone anymore. It's irresponsible. I stared at him, incredulous. Cognitive damage? I remembered every detail of my medical charts. The doctor had said I had mild motor impairment, not brain damage. I was fully lucid. Don't you dare lie to me, Brandon. I snapped, straightening my back. My mind is fine. I built this house. I know every wire, every pipe, every beam in this structure. I laid this foundation with my own sweat. 40 years ago, I turned a patch of dirt into a $1.8 million estate on the most desirable lakefront in the county. I am not some senile old man you can just discard. I am Augustus Wainwright, and this is my property. Brandon sighed, rubbing his temples as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. It's not your property anymore, Dad. We executed the power of attorney you signed before surgery. We transferred the title. It's done. We did it to protect the asset, to protect you from yourself. I felt the blood drain from my face. Power of attorney. I had signed a medical power of attorney, just in case I didn't wake up from the operation. They had used it. They had twisted it to steal everything. And them? I pointed the cane at Jerry, who was still lounging in the doorway wearing my robe. Why are your in-laws living in my house if it's supposed to be for my protection? Tiffany stepped forward, the pearls clicking softly as she moved. Her voice was dripping with condescension. My parents are doing us a huge favor, Gus. They agreed to move in and maintain the property. A big house like this needs constant care, something you're obviously incapable of providing now. You should be thanking them. You should be grateful that we found a solution that keeps the house in the family instead of selling it to strangers. Grateful? She wanted me to be grateful that she had evicted me and moved her freeloading parents into the home I built for my wife. I felt a surge of adrenaline that momentarily masked the pain in my body. I didn't care about the odds. I didn't care that I was outnumbered. I needed to get inside. I needed to get to my safe in the study. The deed, the original trust documents. They were in there. If I could just get my hands on them, I could prove this was illegal. Move, Brandon. I growled and I lunged forward. I tried to push past him, aiming for the open door. Brandon stepped aside almost too easily, but he wasn't the one stopping me. Jerry Shepard, seeing me make a move for the door, stepped out with surprising speed. He didn't just block me. He planted both hands on my chest and shoved with all his weight. Get back, old man, Jerry shouted. My weakened legs couldn't hold me. I flew backward, my cane flying from my grasp. I hit the concrete steps hard, my head cracking against the stone riser. A sharp, blinding pain exploded in my skull. I gasped, air leaving my lungs as the sky spun above me. I felt a warm trickle of blood running down my forehead, stinging my eye. I lay there, stunned, looking up at the three of them. Brandon looked away, unable to watch. Tiffany checked her nails, looking bored. And Jerry stood over me, wiping his hands on my silk robe, as if he'd just taken out the trash. That's enough, Brandon mumbled, finally looking at me. Let's go get him in the car. We're taking him to Sunny Meadows. My head was spinning, a carousel of pain and confusion. I expected sirens. I expected someone to call an ambulance because I was bleeding on the concrete. Instead, I felt rough hands grabbing me under my armpits. It was Jerry. He hoisted me up, not with care, but with the impatient heave one uses for a bag of mulch. Brandon grabbed my feet. My own son, whom I had carried to bed 1,000 times when he was small, was now carrying me like a piece of unwanted furniture. I tried to kick, to thrash, but my body wouldn't obey. The stroke had left me slower, weaker, and the fall had knocked the wind out of me. They shoved me into the back seat of my own truck, the leather interior smelling of the vanilla air freshener I always used. It was a smell of home, now twisted into the scent of a prison cell. Jerry squeezed in beside me, his bulk pressing me against the door, effectively pinning me down. Brandon slammed the driver's door and locked the central locking system with a loud, final clunk. Wait, I gasped, touching my forehead. My hand came away red. I need a doctor. I'm bleeding. You're fine, Dad, Brandon said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror for a split second before darting away. It's just a scratch. We're taking you where you need to be. I reached for my pocket, my instinct screaming at me to call the police, to call Catherine, to call anyone. My hand brushed the familiar rectangle of my smartphone. But before I could pull it out, Jerry's meaty hand clamped over my wrist. He twisted it, sending a fresh spike of pain up my arm, and snatched the phone from my grip. I'll take that, Jerry grunted. Give it back. I shouted or tried to, but it came out as a croak. That's my property. Brandon spoke up from the front seat, his voice calm, rational, terrifying. It's for safekeeping, Dad. You lose things. You're confused. We don't want you calling people at all hours and bothering them with your delusions. Hand over the wallet too, Jerry. No, I rasped, pressing my hand against my other pocket. My ID, my credit cards, my life. Jerry didn't ask twice. He shoved his hand into my pocket, wrestling the leather wallet free while I swiped feebly at him. He tossed both the phone and the wallet to the front seat. Tiffany caught them, dropping them into her designer bag with a satisfied click of the clasp. "There," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Now we can focus." The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel as we sped away from the lake house. I watched through the tinted glass as my home, my sanctuary, disappeared behind the trees. Buster was still on the porch, barking silently, abandoned, just as my family had abandoned me. We drove in silence for a few miles. I leaned my head against the cool glass, the vibration of the road rattling my aching skull. We weren't heading toward the city hospital. We were heading toward the industrial district, the part of the county where the pavement cracked and the streetlights didn't always work. Tiffany pulled out her phone. She didn't whisper. She didn't try to hide what she was doing. She wanted me to hear. She dialed a number and put it on speaker, resting the phone on the center console. "Yes, this is Mrs. Wainwright," she said, her voice bright and cheery, a stark contrast to the venom she had spewed earlier. "We're en route. Yes, the transport is secured." I listened, holding my breath. "Excellent," she continued. "We're about 20 minutes out. Is the room ready?" "Perfect. And the isolation protocols?" "Good. We don't want him wandering or agitating the other residents. He's very confused. Poor dear. Violent too. He tried to attack my father." "Liar," I hissed. "You're lying." She ignored me. "Just make sure the paperwork is ready for Brandon to sign. We want to drop him off and leave immediately. We have a dinner reservation." "Thank you. See you soon." She hung up and turned to look at me, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You hear that, Gus? You're going to a special place. A place where you can't hurt anyone." "What is Sunny Meadows?" I asked, the name floating up from the depths of my memory. It sounded like a place where dreams went to die. "It's a facility that accepts state aid cases," Brandon said quietly. "Since we transferred your assets on paper, you're indigent, Dad. You don't have any money. So this is the best we could do." I stared at the back of his head. "You made me a pauper. You stole my life's work, and now you're dumping me in a state home." "It's not a dump," Brandon said defensively. "It has a roof and beds." 30 minutes later, the truck slowed down. The neighborhood was desolate. We passed abandoned warehouses and a strip mall with boarded-up windows. Finally, we turned into a parking lot surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The sign out front was faded, the letters peeling off. Sunny Meadows Extended Care. It looked less like a care facility and more like a minimum security prison that had lost its funding. The building was a block of gray concrete, stained with years of neglect. Weeds grew through the cracks in the sidewalk. As Brandon killed the engine, a smell hit me, even through the closed windows. It was the smell of hopelessness, a mix of industrial bleach, boiled cabbage, and stale urine. "I'm not going in there," I said, panic rising in my throat. I refused to move. Jerry opened the door and grabbed my arm. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Gus. Your choice." They dragged me out. My legs dragged on the asphalt, ruining my shoes. I tried to shout to a passing nurse in the parking lot, but she didn't even look up, her eyes glued to her phone as she smoked a cigarette. They marched me through the automatic doors. The air inside was stiflingly hot and humid. The linoleum floor was scuffed and yellowed. In the lobby, which was nothing more than a few plastic chairs and a television bolted to the wall, sat a row of elderly people. They were slumped over, silent, staring at nothing. They looked like ghosts. A woman stepped out from behind a glass partition. She was massive, her white uniform straining against her bulk. Her name tag read, Head Nurse Hatcher. She didn't smile. She looked at me, then at Brandon, sizing us up like a butcher inspecting meat. "This the admission?" she asked, her voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "Yes," Tiffany said, stepping forward and handing over a thick file folder. "Augustus Wainwright. He's non-compliant. High flight risk. Aggressive." Hatcher nodded, flipping through the papers. "We got the call. Room 4B is open. It's secure." She came around the counter. Up close, she smelled of stale tobacco and heavy perfume. She grabbed my chin, turning my head side to side, examining the cut on my forehead. "Nasty bump," she muttered. "We'll clean it up." "But he looks agitated. Look at those eyes." "I am not agitated," I yelled, pulling away from her grip. "I am being kidnapped. These people stole my house. I need a police officer. Call the police." Hatcher didn't even blink. She looked at Brandon. "See? Delusional. Paranoid. Common in these late-stage cases." She snapped her fingers and two male orderlies appeared from a hallway. They were big, bored-looking men. "Take Mr. Wayne to 4B, Hatcher ordered. "And prep a sedative. 10 milligrams of Haldol. We need him calm for the night shift." "No!" I screamed as the orderlies grabbed my arms. "Brandon, don't let them do this. I'm your father." Brandon looked at his shoes. Tiffany checked her watch. Jerry just smirked. The orderlies dragged me down a long, dimly lit corridor. I fought. I kicked. I bit one of them on the arm. He swore and tightened his grip, twisting my arm behind my back until I cried out in pain. They threw me into a room at the end of the hall. It was tiny, with 4 beds crammed into a space meant for 2. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies. They pushed me down onto a bare mattress. Hatcher came in a moment later holding a syringe. The needle glinted under the flickering fluorescent light. "This is for your own good, sweetie," she said, her voice devoid of any sweetness. "Just relax." I tried to scramble backward, pressing myself against the cold cinder block wall. "You can't do this. I have rights." "You have a guardian," she corrected, nodding toward the door where Brandon was signing a piece of paper. "And he says you need to sleep." The orderlies held me down. One sat on my legs. The other pinned my chest. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I looked past the nurse, through the open door, and saw Brandon handing the clipboard back. He turned and walked away, Tiffany and Jerry trailing behind him. He didn't look back. Not once. I felt the sting of the needle in my shoulder. "No," I whispered, my voice fading. The cold liquid spread through my veins. The room began to swim. The peeling paint on the ceiling started to swirl. My eyelids grew heavy, like lead weights were pulling them down. The sounds of the facility, the moans, the clattering carts, the television faded into a dull roar. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the face of the nurse looking down at me with absolute indifference. And the last thing I felt was the crushing weight of total, absolute betrayal. My freedom was gone. My name was gone. I was just a body in bed for B. And the world went black. I woke up to the sound of screaming. It wasn't a cry of pain, but a rhythmic, hollow howling that seemed to have no beginning and no end. My eyelids felt like sandpaper as I forced them open. For a moment, I didn't know who I was, or where I was. The last memory I had was the cold sting of a needle and the face of my son turning his back on me. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea pushed me back down against the lumpy mattress. My mouth tasted like copper and old dust. My head throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, the after effect of whatever chemical cocktail they had pumped into my veins. I looked around, blinking against the harsh, flickering fluorescent light overhead. This wasn't a hospital room. It was a holding cell. The walls were painted a color that might have once been beige, but was now stained with years of grime and neglect. The room was tiny, claustrophobic, yet somehow they had crammed 4 hospital beds into a space meant for 2. I was in the corner bed. To my right, a skeletal old man was thrashing against the side rails, shouting a name I didn't recognize. Across from me, another figure lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling with milky, unseeing eyes, his mouth open in a silent gasp. The air was thick, heavy, with the smell of ammonia, unwashed bodies, and the distinct, cloying scent of institutional food. I tried to speak, but my voice was a dry croak. I needed water. I needed to know how much time had passed. I looked at my wrist, but my watch was gone. My Tag Heuer, a gift to myself when I retired, had been stripped from me. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest, fighting through the fog of the sedatives. I managed to push myself up on one elbow. "Hey!" I rasped. "Is anyone there?" The screaming man stopped for a second, looked at me with wild, terrified eyes, and then resumed his howling. "Help! They're coming! The fire! The fire!" I pressed the call button attached to the side of my bed. I pressed it again and again. Nothing happened. No light turned on above the door. No chime sounded. It was broken or worse, disconnected. I realized then that I wasn't in a place of healing. I was in a warehouse for the discarded. It took what felt like hours, though it might have been minutes, for the door to bang open. A nurse marched in. It wasn't Hatcher, the woman who had admitted me. This one was younger, with tired eyes and a stain on her scrubs. She didn't look at me. She went straight to the screaming man, checking his diaper with a rough efficiency that made me wince. "Excuse me?" I said, forcing strength into my voice. "I need water, and I need to use the phone." The nurse finished with the other patient and turned to me, wiping her hands on her uniform. "You're awake? Hatcher said you'd be out for another 12 hours. You got a hard head, old man." I sat up fully, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold and sticky. "I am not an old man. I am Augustus Wainwright. I was brought here against my will. I demand to see a lawyer. I need to call the police." The nurse let out a short, humorless laugh. She walked over to the foot of my bed and picked up a metal clipboard. "A lawyer? That's cute. You don't get a lawyer, Mr. Wainwright. You get Jell-O and a sponge bath if you behave." "I'm serious," I growled, gripping the bed rail. "My son stole my house. This is kidnapping. I have rights." She sighed, tapping the clipboard with a pen. "Let me explain something to you so we don't have to do this every shift. I have your file right here. It says you're a ward of the state, under the care of your legal guardian, Mr. Brandon Wainwright. It says you have been declared mentally incapacitated due to severe cognitive decline and aggression. Incapacitated. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was a legal death sentence. It meant I wasn't a person anymore in the eyes of the law. I was property. I was a child. I couldn't sign checks. I couldn't make decisions. I couldn't even leave this room without permission. "That's a lie," I shouted, my hands shaking. "I'm perfectly sane. I had a stroke, but my mind is fine. Brandon lied to the doctors." The nurse looked bored. "Yeah, well, the paper says otherwise. And the paper is signed by a judge. So, unless you have a judge in your pocket, you're staying right here. You have no rights to call anyone. Your guardian has restricted your communication privileges for your own safety. He says you get confused and agitated on the phone. Restricted privileges. Brandon hadn't just locked me away. He had silenced me. He had made sure I couldn't reach out to Catherine, to my friends, to anyone who could help. He had buried me alive. I want to speak to the administrator, I demanded. She's busy, the nurse said, turning to leave. Lunch is in 10 minutes. Eat it. She walked out, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. The lock clicked. I was trapped. I looked at the other men in the room. They were my future. Forgotten. Screaming into the void. Waiting to die. I felt a tear run down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. 10 minutes later, a cart rattled down the hallway. The door opened again, and a different orderly shoved a plastic tray onto the rolling table at my bedside. Chow time. He grunted and left. I looked at the tray. My stomach turned. In a small plastic bowl was a gray, lukewarm sludge that smelled like wet cardboard. Beside it was a single slice of white bread. I picked up the bread. On the bottom crust there was a spot of fuzzy green mold. I dropped the bread back onto the tray. This was it. This was the care my son had purchased with my millions. He hadn't just put me in a home. He had shopped around for the cheapest, most bottom-barrel facility he could find. Sunny Meadows wasn't a care facility. It was a dumping ground. He was saving every penny of my money, probably spending it on Tiffany's jewelry or Jerry's gambling debts, while I was expected to eat moldy bread and rot in a room that smelled of death. The rage that filled me was cold and sharp. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger I had felt at the house. This was different. This was the calculating resolve of a man who has nothing left to lose. I pushed the tray away. I wouldn't eat their poison. I needed to keep my mind clear. I sat there for hours watching the room. I cataloged every detail. The camera in the corner of the ceiling, blinking with a slow red light. The way the light shifted as the afternoon wore on. The routine of the staff. They checked on us every 4 hours, minimum effort. They didn't look at us. To them, we were just bodies to be cleaned and fed. And then, around late afternoon, I saw him. The door opened quietly. It wasn't a nurse or an orderly. It was a man in a gray jumpsuit pushing a mop bucket. He was young, maybe in his 20s, with dark hair and a nervous energy. He mopped the floor with quick, jerky movements, keeping his head down. His name tag read Luis. He worked his way around the room, mopping under the beds of the sleeping men. When he got to the far corner near the bathroom door, he stopped. He looked up at the camera in the ceiling. He took a small step to the left, positioning himself directly under it, in the blind spot where the lens couldn't see. He pulled a smartphone out of his pocket. My heart skipped a beat. A phone? A connection to the outside world. He tapped furiously on the screen, his face illuminated by the glow. He wasn't supposed to be doing that. I knew the rules of these places. Staff weren't allowed on their phones during shifts. He was breaking the rules. He was hiding. I watched him, my mind racing. He was afraid of being caught. That meant he had something to lose. That meant he could be bargained with. I coughed. A low, deliberate sound. Luis jumped, almost dropping the phone. He shoved it back into his pocket and spun around, eyes wide. He looked at me, expecting me to be asleep or out of it like the others. I held his gaze. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at him, man to man. I raised my hand slowly and pointed to my wrist, where my watch used to be. Nice phone, I whispered. Luis froze. He looked at the door, then back at me. Please, senor, don't tell. My boss, he fired me. I beckoned him closer. He hesitated, then shuffled toward my bed, gripping his mop handle like a shield. I won't tell, I said softly, but I need a favor. A big one. Luis shook his head. No favors. I just clean. I don't get involved. I reached under my pillow. I didn't have money. Brandon and Jerry had taken my wallet. I had nothing except one thing. When they dragged me in the confusion, they hadn't checked my left wrist. I wasn't wearing my watch there. I was wearing an old silver bracelet. It wasn't expensive looking, but it was solid sterling silver, heavy, engraved with my initials. It was the only thing I had left of my father. I unclasped it, felt heavy in my hand. I need 10 minutes with that phone, I said. Just 10 minutes. You give me the phone, you take this. It's silver. Real silver. You can pawn it for $100 easy. Luis looked at the bracelet, then at his phone. $100 was probably a day's wage for him. He bit his lip. If they catch me, he whispered. They won't, I promised. I'm in the blind spot too if I lean back. Just 10 minutes, Luis. Please. A man's life depends on it. He looked into my eyes. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the sanity. He saw that I didn't belong here. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the phone and handed it to me. I pressed the silver bracelet into his palm. Luis looked at the silver bracelet in his hand and shook his head slowly. He pushed it back toward me. Too risky, he whispered. Not enough for my job. If Hatcher catches me, I lose everything. I need real money. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I was so close. I could feel the lifeline slipping through my fingers. I didn't have cash. They had taken my wallet. They had taken my cards. But then I remembered. When the orderlies had stripped me of my clothes and forced me into this hospital gown, they had been careless. They had taken my tag Heuer from my wrist, yes, but they hadn't checked my ankle. Years ago, after a robbery at a construction site, I had developed a habit of wearing my most prized possession, a vintage Rolex Submariner that my father had left me, strapped around my ankle, under my sock, whenever I traveled or felt uneasy. It was a quirk, a secret paranoia, that had just become my salvation. I reached down, grimacing as my stiff joints protested. I rolled down the thick gray hospital sock. There it was. The stainless steel glinted in the dim light of the room. It was worth $10,000 easily. A legacy I had planned to give to Brandon one day. Now it was the price of a phone call. I unbuckled it. The weight of it in my hand felt like an anchor. Take it, I said, pressing the cold metal into Luis's hand. It's a Rolex. Real. You can sell it for thousands. Just give me the phone. Luis's eyes widened. He knew what it was. He snatched the watch, shoving it deep into his pocket, and handed me the smartphone without another word. He moved to the door, cracking it open to keep watch, his body tense. I had the phone. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I needed to call Catherine, my lawyer. But a knowing, terrified instinct in my gut told me I needed to know the extent of the damage first. I needed to know if I had the resources to fight this war. If they had taken the house, what else had they taken? I dialed the number for EFAS, my First National Bank. I knew it by heart. I had banked with them for 40 years. The automated voice answered, cool and detached. Welcome to telephone banking. Please enter your account number. I typed in the digits from memory. My breath hitched as the system processed. For security, please answer your security question. The voice droned. What was the name of your first pet? I closed my eyes. Ranger, my old German Shepherd, the dog that had guarded my first job site. I typed the letters on the keypad. RANGER. Identity confirmed. The voice said, please wait while we access your accounts. The seconds of silence felt like hours. I could hear the heavy breathing of the man in the bed next to me. I could hear the squeak of Luis's shoes by the door. For the checking account ending in 442, the balance is $0. My stomach dropped. That account usually held about $10,000 for operating expenses. For the high-yield savings account ending in 889, the balance is $0. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. That was my emergency fund. $50,000 gone. For the retirement investment account ending in 661, the balance is $0. No, I whispered, the phone trembling against my ear. That was impossible. That account had $850,000 in it. My life savings. The money I had broken my back for 50 years to accumulate. The money that was supposed to ensure I never ended up in a place like Sunny Meadows. Please list last transactions. I commanded the voice, my voice breaking. Processing, the voice replied. Transaction 1. Transfer of $200,000 to Wayrite Renovation LLC. Transaction 2. Transfer of $300,000 to Shepherd Holdings. Transaction 3. Transfer of $350,000 to Shepherd Holdings. Shepherd Holdings. Jerry. My son had drained my entire life savings and funneled nearly $700,000 to his father-in-law, and the rest to a shell company for renovations on a house they had already stolen from me. They hadn't just taken the house. They had picked the carcass clean. They had left me with absolutely nothing. I was destitute, a pauper in a state facility. The rage that filled me was so intense. My vision blurred. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall. But I couldn't. I had to be smart. I had to survive. Time's up, Luis hissed from the doorway. Nurse coming. I quickly cleared the call history and handed the phone back to him. He wiped the screen on his jumpsuit and vanished into the hallway just as heavy footsteps approached. I lay back down, pulling the thin, scratchy blanket up to my chin. I feigned sleep, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The door didn't open. The footsteps stopped just outside. It was the nurse's station located just down the hall. The acoustics of the old building were terrible, the ventilation ducts carrying sound like a microphone. I heard a beep, followed by the sound of a call connecting on speakerphone. Mrs. Wayrite? This is Nurse Hatcher. I held my breath. Hatcher, the woman who had sedated me. Actually, it's Mr. Wayrite. Brandon's voice came through the wall, tiny but unmistakable. My wife is busy. What's the issue? It's about your father's medication protocol, Hatcher said, her voice bored. The doctor prescribed a nootropic to help with the cognitive damage from the stroke. It helps rebuild neural pathways, but it's not covered by the basic state aid package. It would be an out-of-pocket expense, about $700 a month. There was a pause. I pictured Brandon sitting in my house, maybe drinking my wine, making a decision about my brain. 700? Brandon sighed. That's steep. Is it absolutely necessary? Well, Hatcher replied. If you want him to have a chance at regaining full lucidity, it's recommended. Without it, and combined with the sedatives, he'll likely remain in a state of confusion. He'll be docile, but he won't be present. I waited. I prayed. My son, my blood. He had stolen the money, yes, but surely he wouldn't deny me my mind. Listen, Brandon said, his voice cold and practical. We're already stretching the budget with the house renovations, and honestly, if he becomes more lucid, he just becomes more agitated. He gets violent. You saw him today. He was a handful. Hatcher agreed. Exactly. We don't want him suffering, Brandon said. We don't want him confused and angry. It's better if he's just calm. Don't fill the prescription for the brain meds. It's too expensive and it's not worth the risk. Just keep him on the sedatives. Keep him comfortable. If he needs a higher dose to stay quiet, authorize it. So, maintain current sedation levels and decline restorative therapy. Hatcher confirmed, the sound of a pen scratching on paper audible. Yes, Brandon said. Just keep him sleeping. It's better for everyone. The line clicked dead. I lay there in the semi-darkness, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. A single tear leaked from my eye and rolled into my ear. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, crystalline realization. They weren't just greedy. They weren't just selfish. They were killing me. They were systematically erasing Augustus Wainwright. First they took my property. Then they took my money. Now they were taking my mind. They wanted me to be a vegetable, a drooling, sleeping body in bed for B that they could visit once a year to keep up appearances until I finally had the decency to stop breathing. If I stayed here one more night, if I let them put another needle in my arm, I would never leave. I would fade away. I would become the crazy old man they claimed I was. I sat up. The dizziness was still there, but the rage was stronger. I looked at the window. It was barred, but the frame was old, rusted steel. I was a builder. I knew metal. I knew structures. And I knew that rust was weakness. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet hit the cold floor. I wasn't Augustus, the victim, anymore. I was Gus, the contractor. And I had one last job to do. I had to break out of my own grave. Tonight, the digital clock on the wall was broken, frozen forever at 4:30. But I knew it was 2 o'clock in the morning. I had spent the last 6 hours lying perfectly still, breathing in a slow, rhythmic cadence, counting the rounds of the night staff. They were lazy. They checked the rooms at 10, at midnight, and they wouldn't be back until 4. That gave me a 2-hour window to reclaim my life. I sat up, my joints protesting with a dry crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I froze, waiting for the shift of a body or a groan from one of my roommates. But the heavy sedation Hatcher had administered to everyone kept them deep in a chemical slumber. I reached under my mattress and pulled out my weapon. It wasn't a knife or a gun. It was a spoon. A simple stainless steel tablespoon I had palmed from the dinner tray 2 nights ago. For 48 hours, every time the nurses weren't looking, I had rubbed the handle against the rough, exposed concrete behind the radiator. I had ground it down until the end was flat and sharp. A makeshift screwdriver, born of desperation. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold, seeping through the thin socks they had given me. I stood up, fighting the vertigo that still lingered from the stroke. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a contractor. I was a builder who had erected skyscrapers and family homes. I knew structures. I knew how buildings breathed. And more importantly, I knew where they were weak. I moved to the door, stepping exactly where Louise had shown me, hugging the wall to stay in the camera's blind spot. I cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the safety lights. The nurse's station was empty, the sound of a television playing a talk show drifting from the break room. I slipped out, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that threatened to deafen me. I didn't head for the main exit. That door was alarmed, wired to a silent system that would alert the police and Hatcher before I even reached the parking lot. No, I headed for the utility wing. I made it past the first 2 doors when I heard it. The squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Someone was coming around the corner. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. There was nowhere to go. The doors on either side were locked patient rooms. Then I saw it. A large canvas laundry cart, pushed against the wall, overflowing with soiled sheets and gowns, waiting for the morning wash. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I dove into the cart, burrowing deep under the pile of linen. The smell hit me instantly. It was a suffocating stench of urine, sweat, and vomit. It was the smell of human misery. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from retching, curling into a tight ball. As the footsteps got closer, the squeaking stopped right next to the cart. I held my breath, my lungs burning. Through the weave of the canvas, I saw the beam of a flashlight play over the wall above me. "Did you hear that?" a male voice asked. "Probably just the pipes," a woman replied, sounding tired. "This place is falling apart. Come on, I want to finish this round so I can have a smoke." The footsteps moved on, fading down the hall. I waited a full minute, counting to 60 in my head, before I pushed the foul-smelling sheets off me. I climbed out of the cart, gasping for fresh air, wiping the filth from my hospital gown. I felt degraded, reduced to hiding in trash. But that shame only fueled the fire in my gut. They would pay for this. Brandon would pay for this. I reached the end of the hall. The storage room door was locked as I expected, but it was an old interior lock, a simple pin tumbler mechanism. I used the handle of the spoon, jamming it into the keyway and applying tension. It wasn't elegant, and it took me 3 tries, sweat stinging my eyes, but finally, I felt the cylinder give. Click. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room was dark, smelling of bleach and mop water. I fumbled along the wall until my hands found what I was looking for. The maintenance closet. I grabbed a pair of gray coveralls hanging on a hook, probably belonging to a janitor, and pulled them on over my gown. They were too big, but they were warm. I found a pair of rubber work boots in the corner. They were tight, pinching my toes, but they were better than socks. Then I turned to the window. It was a small, rectangular window set high in the wall, covered by a metal mesh screen. This was why I chose this room. The main windows had bars. This one, because it was just a storage closet, had been overlooked during the last security upgrade. It was an old steel casement window, the kind with the hinges on the outside, its frame secured by screws that had been painted over 1,000 times. I climbed up onto a shelving unit, my muscles trembling with the effort. I took my sharpened spoon and dug into the layers of paint covering the screw heads on the latch. The paint chipped away, revealing the rusted metal underneath. I inserted the flat edge of the spoon into the slot of the first screw. It wouldn't budge. Come on! I gritted my teeth, putting all my weight behind it. My wrists, still weak from the stroke, screamed in protest. I thought of Jerry in my robe. I thought of Tiffany wearing Martha's pearls. I thought of Brandon signing the order to rot my brain. I roared silently, a guttural sound in my throat, and twisted. The screw gave with a screech of tearing metal. One by one I removed the screws. It took 20 minutes, my hands bleeding, my knuckles raw, but finally the latch hung loose. I pushed the window. It was stuck with paint. I slammed the heel of my hand against the frame once, twice. On the third hit, it swung outward into the cool night air. I squeezed my body through the narrow opening. It was a tight fit. I scraped my ribs through the coveralls, but I pushed through, tumbling out onto the wet grass of the backyard. I lay there for a moment, looking up at the stars. I was out. I was free, but I wasn't safe yet. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't run fast, my bad leg dragging slightly, but I moved with a relentless determination. I climbed the low fence at the back of the property, tearing my palm on the chain link, and dropped into the drainage ditch on the other side. I walked through the industrial wasteland, the wind cutting through the thin coveralls. My hip burned like it was on fire. My head throbbed. Every step was a battle against exhaustion. I walked for hours, following the distant glow of streetlights. Cars passed me, but I hid in the shadows. I couldn't risk the police picking me up and returning me to Brandon. 5 miles. I walked 5 miles that night. Finally, just as the sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple in the east, I saw it. A 24-hour gas station, its fluorescent sign buzzing like a beacon of hope. I stumbled inside. The clerk, a teenager with piercings and sleepy eyes, looked up from his magazine. He saw a crazy old man in stolen janitor clothes, covered in dirt and dried blood. He reached for the alarm button under the counter. "Please," I croaked, my throat like sandpaper. "I'm not going to rob you. I just need to use the phone. I have money." I dug into the pocket of the coveralls. I found a $10 bill that the owner had left there. I slapped it on the counter. "Just one call," I pleaded. The kid looked at the money, then at me. He slid a landline phone across the counter. "Make it quick, Pops." I picked up the receiver. My fingers shook as I dialed. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a doctor. I called the one person who terrified Brandon more than anyone else. The phone rang 4 times. Then a groggy, sharp voice answered. "Hello? This is Catherine Sterling. Who is this calling at 4 in the morning?" "Catherine?" I whispered, leaning against the counter to keep from collapsing. "It's Gus Wainwright. Uncle Gus." There was a silence on the other end. Then the rustle of sheets and a sudden, intense alertness. "Gus, my God. Brandon told everyone you had a massive stroke and were in a coma. Where are you?" "I'm at the Shell station on Route 9. I escaped, Catherine. They took everything. The house, the money, my freedom. They tried to drug me into oblivion." "Stay there." Her voice was steel. "I'm coming. Lock the door if you can. Do not talk to anyone. I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and slid down to the floor, sitting with my back against the counter. The clerk looked at me, concerned now. "You want some water, man?" I nodded. 20 minutes later, a silver Mercedes sedan screeched into the parking lot. It didn't park. It stopped right in front of the doors. A woman stepped out. She was tall, wearing a trench coat over silk pajamas, her hair in a messy bun, but her eyes were fierce. Catherine Sterling, the daughter of my old business partner, the little girl I used to buy ice cream for, who had grown up to be the toughest shark in the city's legal waters. She rushed into the store. When she saw me sitting on the floor in dirty coveralls, bruises on my face, she didn't recoil. She dropped to her knees beside me, her eyes scanning my injuries with a lawyer's precision and a niece's love. "Gus," she breathed, taking my hand. "You look terrible." I managed a weak, cracked smile. "You should see the other guy, or the window at least." She helped me stand, wrapping her arm around my waist to support me. She led me out to her car, opened the passenger door and helped me in. As she settled into the driver's seat and started the engine, the heater blasting warm air onto my frozen skin, She looked at me. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She didn't say everything would be okay. She looked at me with a cold, dangerous fire in her eyes. Rest now, Gus, she said, shifting the car into gear. But don't worry, we're going to get it all back. And then we're going to bury them. For 3 days, I lived like a ghost in Catherine's guest house. It was a beautiful space, safe and warm, with a fridge full of food and a bed that didn't smell of despair. Catherine was brilliant. She was already drafting motions, filing emergency injunctions, and preparing a lawsuit that would hit Brandon like a freight train. But legal papers take time, and my anxiety was a living thing, pacing inside my chest. I couldn't just sit there drinking tea while strangers lived in my home. I needed to know what was happening. I needed ammunition. Catherine warned me against it. She said it was dangerous, that if I violated the restraining order or trespassed, it could hurt our case. But I wasn't going there to fight. I was going there to watch. I waited until the moon was obscured by heavy clouds. I borrowed an old windbreaker from Catherine's gardener and took a taxi to the edge of the neighborhood, walking the last mile through the woods that bordered the lake. My hip ached with every step, a constant reminder of Jerry's shove, but the pain only sharpened my focus. I knew every inch of this property. I knew that the motion sensor on the back floodlight had a 3-second delay. I knew that the camera covering the patio had a blind spot if you crouched behind the azalea bushes near the retaining wall. I had installed the system myself, never imagining I would be the one sneaking past it. I crept through the underbrush, the wet leaves soaking my shoes. I reached the edge of the manicured lawn and froze. The backyard, usually a place of quiet reflection where Martha and I would watch the sunset, was transformed into a grotesque carnival. Portable speakers were blasting distorted, bass-heavy music that rattled the windows. The patio lights were blazing. Jerry Shepherd was standing by the massive stone fire pit I had built for family gatherings. He was holding a beer in one hand and a hatchet in the other. Next to him was his wife, Linda. I had only met her a handful of times. A loud woman with a taste for gossip and cheap wine. They were laughing, a harsh, grating sound that cut through the night air. I squinted, trying to see what they were doing. Jerry was struggling to get the fire going. The flames were sputtering. "This wood is damp," Jerry complained, taking a swig of beer. "I told you we should have bought charcoal." "I'm not driving to the store now," Linda shouted over the music. "Just find something dry." Jerry looked around. His eyes landed on the covered patio area. My breath hitched. Stacked against the wall was a set of 4 hand-carved oak chairs. They weren't patio furniture. They were antiques. My grandfather had brought them over from England in 1920. They had survived the Great Depression, 2 moves, and a house fire. I had just moved them outside temporarily to refinish the varnish before my stroke. Jerry stumbled over to the stack. He grabbed the top chair by its delicate spindle back. "These look dry enough," he grunted. "No," I whispered, my hand involuntarily reaching out through the leaves. Jerry dragged the chair to the fire pit. He didn't even pause to look at the craftsmanship, the century-old patina of the wood. He raised the hatchet and brought it down. There was a sickening crack. The wood splintered. It sounded like a bone breaking. He hacked at it again and again, laughing as the legs flew off. He kicked the pieces into the fire. The dry, seasoned oak caught immediately, flaring up in a bright, hot blaze. "That's better," Linda cheered, clapping her hands. I felt a physical nausea rising in my throat. They were burning my history. They were warming their hands over the corpse of my family's legacy, because they were too lazy to drive 5 minutes to a gas station. But the horror wasn't over. As the flames rose, illuminating the patio more clearly, I got a better look at Linda. She was twirling around, holding a large glass of red wine. She was wearing a long, shimmering blue gown. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying I was hallucinating. I opened them again. It was undeniable. It was Martha's dress, the midnight blue silk gown she had worn to the charity gala 5 years ago. It was the last time we had gone dancing before she got sick. She looked like a queen in that dress. We had wrapped it in acid, free tissue paper, and stored it in the cedar closet, intending to give it to a granddaughter one day. Linda Shepherd, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, was wearing it to a backyard barbecue. The delicate fabric was strained across her waist, the zipper clearly struggling. She looked like a child playing dress-up in clothes far too precious for her to understand. She took a clumsy spin, giggling. "Look at me, Jerry. I feel fancy." "You look like $1,000,000, babe," Jerry shouted, throwing another leg of my grandfather's chair into the fire. Linda stumbled. The wine glass in her hand tipped. A dark crimson splash washed down the front of the silk bodice. "Oops," she shrieked, looking down at the stain. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. That stain wouldn't come out. That dress was ruined. A piece of Martha, a memory of the woman I loved, was being destroyed right in front of me by a drunk woman who didn't even care. "Oh well," Linda said, wiping at the silk with a greasy napkin. "It's just old rags anyway. There's plenty more in the closet." Tiffany said I could take whatever I wanted. Take whatever she wanted. Tiffany hadn't just moved them in. She had given them free rein to loot my life. My hand went to my pocket. I pulled out the smartphone Luis had risked his job to get me. I opened the camera app. My hands were shaking with a rage so profound it felt like ice in my veins. I wanted to storm out there. I wanted to grab the hatchet from Jerry and show him what it felt like to be broken. I wanted to rip that dress off Linda and scream until my lungs gave out. But I couldn't. Catherine's voice echoed in my head. We need proof, Gus. We need to show the judge that they're destroying the asset. We need to prove they're unfit. I steadied my hand against a branch. I pressed record. I zoomed in on Jerry feeding the antique wood into the fire. I captured the hatchet striking the carved seat. I panned to Linda, capturing the wine stain, the laughter, the careless way she wiped her greasy hands on the silk. I recorded their conversation, their admissions of theft, their absolute disregard for everything I held dear. The video was 3 minutes long. 3 minutes of evidence. 3 minutes of torture. When Jerry went inside to get more beer, leaving the fire roaring with the remains of my heritage, I stopped recording. I saved the file. I backed it up to the cloud, just as Catherine had taught me. I took one last look at my house. It looked like a monster, with glowing eyes, consuming everything I loved. But as I turned to slip back into the darkness of the woods, I wasn't just a grieving widower anymore. I was a man with a weapon. I had the proof. They thought they were celebrating their victory, dancing on my grave. But they didn't know that the ghost in the garden was watching, and he was writing down every single sin. I backed away from the hedge, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure fury against my ribs. I had the video of the bonfire, the destruction of the antique chairs, and the desecration of Martha's dress. It was enough to make any judge with a pulse sign a restraining order. But Catherine's voice whispered in the back of my mind, reminding me that we needed more than just proof of vandalism. We needed proof of intent. We needed to know the endgame. I looked toward the house. The party was still raging on the patio, but the air was getting colder. Soon they would move inside. I knew exactly where they would go. The great room, with its vaulted ceilings and the massive fireplace I had laid stone by stone. It was the heart of the house. I needed to be inside, but going through a door or window was suicide. The alarm system, even if they hadn't changed the code, would chime. But I had a secret I hadn't even told Brandon. When I built this house 30 years ago, I installed a dedicated service access for the main plumbing and HVAC lines. It was a narrow, subterranean crawl space that ran beneath the foundation, accessible only through a camouflaged hatch in the backyard. I had covered the hatch with a hollow, artificial boulder made of fiberglass and resin, indistinguishable from the real granite rocks that dotted the landscape. It was my insurance policy against frozen pipes in the winter, a way to fix problems without digging up the floors. I crept along the perimeter of the yard, staying deep in the shadows of the pine trees. I reached the rock garden near the back corner of the lot. There it was. The large, mossy boulder sat undisturbed, looking as heavy and permanent as a mountain. I knelt in the damp earth, my hands, still trembling slightly from the stroke and the cold, felt around the base of the rock. I found the hidden latch mechanism I had designed. I pressed my thumb against the release catch and pulled. The boulder, which looked like it weighed a ton, swung up silently on hidden hydraulic hinges. A rush of stale, earthy air hit my face. The dark mouth of the access tunnel yawned open. I lowered myself into the hole, my feet finding the metal rungs of the ladder bolted to the concrete wall. I pulled the rock closed above me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I didn't dare turn on the flashlight on the phone. The vents above were grated, but light could filter up and give me away. I moved by touch and memory. I knew this space. I knew the rough texture of the poured concrete floor, the hum of the furnace in the distance, the smell of copper pipes and insulation. I crouched low, moving like a soldier in a trench. My bad hip screamed in protest at the awkward posture, sending spikes of fire down my leg, but I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. I navigated through the maze of support beams and ductwork until I reached the central junction box. This was the sweet spot. Directly above me was the main intake vent for the heating system. It was a large, floor-level grate hidden behind the sofa in the living room. Because of the way I had designed the acoustics to carry heat efficiently, it also acted as a perfect amplifier for sound coming from the room above. I stood up slowly, pressing my ear near the metal ducting. At first, I only heard the muffled thumping of the bass from the music outside, but then I heard the sliding glass door open and close above me. The music faded as the door shut, cutting out the noise of the party. Footsteps clicked on the hardwood floor. Hard, sharp heels. Tiffany. And the shuffling, heavy tread of her mother, Linda. "It's freezing out there," Linda complained, her voice echoing down the vent as clearly as if she were standing next to me. "I need a refill. Where do you keep the good stuff?" "Not that swill Jerry's drinking." "Check the cabinet above the fridge," Tiffany replied. The sound of a cabinet opening and a bottle clinking against a glass followed. "Gus had a stash of vintage port. Brandon doesn't drink it, so help yourself." My hands clenched in the dark. That port was from the year Martha and I were married. I was saving it for our 50th anniversary. Now it was being guzzled by a woman who had used my wife's dress as a napkin. "So," Linda said, the sound of liquid pouring filling the silence, "when do we cash out? Your father is getting impatient. He wants to buy that boat he's been talking about." "Not yet, Mom," Tiffany said. Her voice was closer now, likely sitting on the sofa right above the vent. "We can't sell the house yet. It's too suspicious. If we listed a week after dumping Gus in the home, People will talk. The neighbors are already nosy. So what? Linda scoffed. Let them talk. It's your house. You have the paper. I have the paper, yes. Tiffany agreed, her tone dropping, becoming more conspiratorial. But selling takes time. Inspections, closings, taxes. It's a headache. I have a better plan. A faster plan. I held my breath in the darkness, pressing my hand against the cold metal of the duct to steady myself. What kind of plan? Linda asked. I had the house appraised yesterday privately, Tiffany said. Do you know what this place is worth? $1.8 million. The land value alone has skyrocketed. And because Gus was obsessed with paying off debt, there's no mortgage. It's free and clear. I heard the greed in her voice, a palpable hunger. So we sell, Linda insisted. No, Tiffany corrected. We leverage. I spoke to a mortgage broker in the city, a friend of a friend. He can rush through a cash-out refinance. We can pull out 60% of the equity immediately. That's over $1 million, Mom. Tax-free cash in our hands in 10 days. $1 million, Linda whistled. And we keep the house? Exactly, Tiffany said. We get the $1 million. We take that trip to Italy we talked about. You and Dad get the boat and the new truck. I get the Mercedes. And we still live in a mansion by the lake. But what about the payments? Linda asked, her voice slurring slightly from the wine. $1 million loan has big payments. Tiffany laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that sent a shiver down my spine in the damp basement. That's the beauty of it. I'm not signing the loan. Brandon is. Brandon? Linda asked. But he does whatever you say. Exactly, Tiffany said. I have him wrapped around my finger. He feels so guilty about putting his dad in the home that he'll do anything to make me happy. To keep the peace. I told him we need the loan to fix up the property, to pay for Gus's long-term care, and to invest in a business opportunity. He didn't even read the paperwork I drafted. He just nodded like a good little puppy. I felt a wave of dizziness. My son. My foolish, weak son. He wasn't just a villain in this story. He was the mark. So he signs the debt, Linda said, catching on. He signs everything, Tiffany confirmed. The loan is in his name. The liability is his. If he can make the payments with his salary, fine. We live here. But if he can't, or if Gus dies and the state comes looking for assets, or if the fraud with the deed ever gets discovered. She paused, and I could hear the clink of her glass setting down on the coffee table. If the ship goes down, Mom, Brandon is the captain. He goes to jail for fraud. He goes bankrupt. Not us. We take the $1 million and we disappear. We go back to Arizona or maybe Mexico. We'll be long gone before the first foreclosure notice hits the mailbox. Jesus, Tiff, Linda giggled. You are wicked. That's my girl. He's useless anyway, Tiffany sighed. He's boring. He's spineless. And without his daddy's money, he's nothing. I tolerated him for the inheritance. Now that we have it, I don't need to tolerate him forever. Just until the check clears. I stood frozen in the crawl space, the metal duct digging into my forehead. The betrayal I had felt before was nothing compared to this. Brandon had betrayed me. Yes, he had thrown me away, but he had done it for her. He had destroyed his own father to please a woman who viewed him as a disposable signature. He was a traitor, but he was also a victim, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He thought he was building a future with his wife. She was building a golden parachute to leave him behind in the wreckage. I thought about the little boy I had taught to ride a bike. The teenager who had cried when his first girlfriend dumped him. He had grown into a weak man, a man I barely recognized. But hearing his wife plan to frame him and leave him to rot in prison broke something inside me that I didn't know was still intact. It wasn't just about getting my house back anymore. It was about saving the fool from the shark he had married. Or maybe, just maybe, it was about letting him see the shark's teeth up close. I fumbled for the phone in my pocket. I had been recording. The voice memo app was running, capturing every word of their conspiracy through the vent. I stopped the recording and saved it. My thumb hovered over the screen. This file, this tiny digital file, was a nuclear bomb. Above me, the conversation shifted to shopping and travel plans. They were spending money they didn't have yet, celebrating a victory they hadn't won. I backed away from the vent, moving silently through the darkness. I retraced my steps to the ladder, climbing up with an energy born of pure, cold adrenaline. I pushed the fake rock open and climbed out into the night air. The party was winding down. I could hear Jerry snoring in a lawn chair. I slipped into the woods, the phone burning a hole in my pocket. Tiffany didn't love Brandon. She didn't love this house. She loved the $1 million she could squeeze out of both of them before discarding the husks. I had the evidence. I had the leverage. But I wasn't going to use it yet. Catherine was right. Let them think they have won. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. Let Brandon sign the papers. Let him commit the crime. Because when the trap finally snapped shut, I needed him to know beyond a shadow of a doubt exactly who had put him there. And it wouldn't be his father. I walked back toward the road, a grim smile playing on my lips. They wanted $1 million. I was going to make sure they paid for every single cent. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Catherine Sterling's corner office, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But the atmosphere inside was anything but light. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, my eyes fixed on Catherine. She had been silent for 20 minutes, her intense gaze darting back and forth between two computer monitors and a stack of physical files spread across her mahogany desk. She looked like a predator sensing blood in the water. I shifted uncomfortably, the bruises from my fall at the house still throbbing a dull, constant rhythm. I had told her everything. The audio recording from the vent, the plans to leverage the house for $1 million, the conspiracy to frame Brandon. I expected her to be angry, to be picking up the phone to call the district attorney immediately. Instead, she was smiling. It started as a small twitch at the corner of her mouth. And then suddenly she leaned back in her chair and let out a loud, genuine laugh that startled me so much I nearly spilled my coffee. "Gus," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You are a genius. An absolute accidental genius." I stared at her, confused. I didn't feel like a genius. I felt like an old man who had been sleeping in a storage closet and hiding in crawl spaces. "What are you talking about, Catherine? They're about to take out $1 million loan on my home. They're going to ruin me." Catherine spun her monitor around so I could see the screen. It was the county recorder's website, displaying the official property records for my address. "Look at this," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at a scanned document. "This is the quitclaim deed Brandon filed 3 weeks ago. This is how he transferred the house out of your name." I leaned in, squinting at the digital image. I saw my son's signature, jagged and rushed, and below it, the line that made my stomach churn. "Signed by Brandon Wainwright as attorney-in-fact for Augustus Wainwright." "He used the medical power of attorney," I said bitterly. "He declared me incompetent and signed my house away." "Yes," Catherine said, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intelligence. "He used a durable power of attorney. That document gives him the right to make financial decisions for Augustus Wainwright, the individual. It allows him to access your personal bank accounts, sign your personal checks, and manage assets held in your personal name." She paused for effect, tapping the desk. "But Gus, do you remember what we did 10 years ago? Right after Martha passed away, you were worried about probate court. You were worried about estate taxes eating up the inheritance for the boys." I racked my brain, the fog of the last month slowly lifting. I remembered the grief, the fear of leaving a mess behind. I remembered coming to this very office, sitting with Catherine's father. "We made a plan," I whispered, the memory surfacing like a shipwreck from the deep. "To protect the assets." "Exactly," Catherine beamed. "We created a revocable living trust." The realization hit me like a thunderclap. The house, my truck, the investment accounts. I hadn't just kept them in my name. I had retitled everything. "The deed to the lake house isn't in the name of Augustus Wainwright," Catherine explained, pulling up the original title document on the other screen. "Look, the owner of record is the Augustus Wainwright Family Trust. And who is the sole trustee of that trust?" "Me," I said, my voice rising. "It's me." "Correct," she said. "You are the grantor and the trustee. And here is the kicker, Gus. A personal power of attorney does not grant the agent the authority to act as a trustee unless the trust document specifically says so. And I wrote that trust. I know for a fact it doesn't. To sell that house or to transfer the title, the signature on the deed needs to be yours, acting as trustee, not Brandon's, acting as your agent." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. Brandon and Tiffany were so greedy, so arrogant, and so cheap that they didn't hire a real estate attorney to handle the transfer. They probably downloaded a generic quitclaim form off the internet, signed it, and rushed it down to the county clerk. The clerk just records the document. They don't verify the legal authority behind it. So, on paper, it looks like the transfer happened. But, legally, I asked, connecting the dots. "Legally," Catherine said, turning back to me with a shark-like grin, "the transfer is void. Ab initio, void from the beginning. It's a worthless piece of paper. The house never left the trust. It is still yours." I sank back into the chair, a wave of relief washing over me. So powerful, it made me dizzy. They didn't own it. They couldn't mortgage it. But then, the darker reality set in. "If the transfer is void," I said slowly, "then what Brandon did?" Catherine nodded, her face hardening. "He signed a legal instrument purporting to transfer title to real property that he did not have the authority to transfer. He swore before a notary that he had the right to sign. That is forgery, Gus. That is filing a false public record. And because the value of the property exceeds $100,000, that is first-degree felony fraud." She walked back to her desk and leaned over it, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He didn't just steal from you, Gus. He committed a crime against the state. If we take this to the district attorney right now, Brandon goes to prison minimum 5 years, probably 10. And Tiffany, since she is the beneficiary on the deed and we have her on tape conspiring to do it, she goes down for conspiracy and grand larceny. My son, a felon." I closed my eyes. I hated what he had done. I hated the person he had become under Tiffany's influence. But the image of him in an orange jumpsuit, behind bars for a decade, still made my heart ache. He was weak. He was stupid. Was he evil? Or was he just a desperate fool trying to please a monster? "We can end this today," Catherine said softly. "We can call the police. We can have them arrested at the house. We can invalidate this deed and kick them out by sunset. I opened my eyes. I thought about the conversation in the vent. I thought about Tiffany calling Brandon useless. I thought about her plan to saddle him with $1 million in debt and then flee to Mexico, leaving him to face the ruin alone. If I arrested him now, he would go to jail, yes, but he might still believe Tiffany loved him. He might still think he was the victim of a misunderstanding. He needed to see. He needed to understand the depth of his wife's betrayal. And frankly, they had stolen $700,000 of my liquid cash. If I arrested them now, that money was gone, spent on lawyers and seized by the state. I looked at Catherine. Is there another way? She studied my face, assessing my resolve. There is always another way, she said slowly. You said they want to refinance, right? They want to pull cash out. Yes, I said. Tiffany wants $1 million. She said something about paying off debts to clear the title first. Catherine's eyes lit up. Ah, that is the key. To get a clean first mortgage for $1 million, they need the property to be unencumbered. If there are any liens or clouds on the title, the new lender won't fund the loan. She sat down and started typing furiously. We can play a game, Gus. A dangerous game, but one that could get your liquidity back. What kind of game? I asked. The honey trap, she said, not looking up from her screen. We know they're scrambling. We know they're greedy. What if we make them think there's a problem? A small, solvable financial problem that stands between them and their $1 million payday. I don't understand, I said. Catherine stopped typing and looked at me. I can create a shell entity, a fake lending company. We can file a lien on the house, claiming an old unpaid debt of yours. Maybe a private construction loan you supposedly took out years ago. We backdate it. We make it look official. And then, she smiled, a wicked, predatory thing. We send them a notice that tells them the lien is about to foreclose, or we offer them a settlement. If they pay off this debt immediately, we release the lien, and the title is clear for their big refinance. How much? I asked. How much cash do you think they can scrape together? Catherine asked. How much did they steal from your retirement? $700,000, I said. But they spent some. Let's say $300,000, Catherine suggested. We demand $300,000 to clear the title. But they don't have $300,000, I argued. They spent it or gave it to Jerry. Then they will find it, Catherine said. Tiffany wants that $1 million loan. She wants it so bad she can taste it. If she thinks a $300,000 payment is the only thing standing in her way, she will bleed Brandon dry to get it. She will make him sell the boat. She will make him borrow from sharks. She will make him empty every account they have. And they pay it to us, Catherine finished. To the trust. They will effectively take the money they stole from you plus whatever else they have, and deposit it right back into an account that only you control. They will think they're paying off a debt to clear the way for their big score. In reality, they're refunding your retirement. I sat back, the brilliance of it washing over me. It was poetic. It was ruthless. It used their own greed as a weapon against them. And after they pay? I asked. After the check clears, Catherine said, leaning back. Then we drop the hammer. We show up. We reveal the fraud. We take the house back. And by then, they are broke. They are exposed. And they have nowhere to run. I thought about it. I thought about Jerry burning my chairs. I thought about Tiffany wearing the pearls. I thought about Brandon, the captain of the sinking ship. Do it, I said, my voice steady. Make them pay. Catherine picked up the phone. I'll draft the lien paperwork now. And Gus, get your suit ready. In a week, we're gonna crash a party. Catherine sat at her mahogany desk, her face illuminated by the cool glow of the monitors. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield, calm, precise, and ready to drop a bomb. On the screen in front of her was an email draft. It was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, designed to trigger the primal fear of anyone with a guilty conscience. The sender was listed as Apex Capital Management, a shell company Catherine had registered in Delaware 24 hours ago. The subject line was written in bold red letters. Final notice of default and intent to foreclose. Read it one more time, Gus, Catherine said, leaning back in her chair. Make sure it sounds authentic. I leaned in, adjusting my glasses. The text was brutal. It stated that a secondary construction lien, dating back to a renovation I had supposedly commissioned 5 years ago, was in default. It claimed that due to a clerical error during the recent title transfer, the debt had been accelerated. The amount due was exactly $300,000. The deadline was 48 hours. If the payment wasn't received by wire transfer, Apex Capital would exercise its right to foreclose on the property immediately, regardless of who currently held the deed. It's perfect, I whispered. It sounds exactly like the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that ruins lives. But will they believe it? Brandon knows I paid off the house. He thinks you paid off the mortgage, Catherine corrected. He doesn't know about private liens or construction loans. And remember, he's not thinking straight. He's panicked. He's sitting on a stolen house, terrified that the house of cards is going to fall. Fear makes people stupid, Gus. And greed makes them blind. She hovered her finger over the enter key. Ready to go fishing? Do it, I said. She pressed the key. The email whooshed away into the digital ether. The trap was set. Now all we could do was wait. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. We sat in silence, watching the tracking software Catherine had installed. At 10:01 in the morning, a notification pinged. The email had been opened. 2 minutes later it was opened again, this time on a mobile device. Then it was forwarded. "They're reacting," Catherine said, her eyes glued to the screen. "Brandon opened it first. Then he sent it to Tiffany. Now they're probably screaming at each other." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene in my living room. I could see Brandon's face draining of color. I could hear Tiffany's shrill voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They were so close to their big payday. They had a mortgage broker ready to hand them $1 million cash. And now suddenly, a ghost from the past had appeared to block the door. At noon, Catherine's phone rang. It was a blocked number. She put it on speaker and winked at me. "This is Apex Capital Legal Department," she answered, her voice dropping an octave, sounding bored and officious. "Yes, hello?" a male voice stammered. It was Brandon. He sounded breathless, like he had been running. "I received a notice regarding the Waywright property. There must be a mistake. We hold the deed." The title search was clean. Catherine didn't miss a beat. "Sir, title searches often miss private equity liens filed under legacy statutes. The debt is valid. The lien is recorded. We have already initiated the foreclosure filing with the county. Unless the balance is settled by close of business tomorrow, the sheriff will be serving eviction notices on Monday." "But," Brandon choked, $300,000? "We don't have that kind of liquidity right now. Can we work out a payment plan?" "I'm afraid not," Catherine said coldly. "The account is in default. Full payment or foreclosure. Those are your options. Have a nice day." She hung up before he could beg. "Now comes the squeeze," she said, turning to her computer. "Watch the bank accounts." Because I was still the legal trustee, and because Brandon had only transferred the funds but not closed my original accounts, Catherine had a backdoor view into their financial movements. We watched the screen. For an hour, nothing happened. Then the frantic activity began. At 1:30, a transfer of $50,000 came in, a lump sum from a generic savings account. That was what was left of the cash they hadn't spent yet. At 2 o'clock, we saw a massive credit card cash advance, $20,000. They were maxing out their cards, paying exorbitant interest rates, desperate to scrape the barrel. But it wasn't enough. They were still short by over $200,000. Where is he going to get the rest? I wondered aloud. Catherine typed a few keys, pulling up a local classified website. "Look at this. Posted 17 minutes ago was a listing. It was a 2023 CR Sundancer. My son's dream boat. The boat he had bought 2 weeks ago with the money he stole from my retirement fund. The listing was frantic. Fire sale. Cash only. Must go today. No reasonable offer refused." "He's selling the boat," I said, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. "He loved that thing more than he loved his own dignity." "Tiffany is making him sell it," Catherine corrected. "She doesn't care about his toys. She cares about her $1 million loan. She's stripping him down to the bone to clear the path for her payday." For the rest of the afternoon, we watched the tragedy of my son's life play out in real-time data. We saw a wire transfer come in from a pawn shop downtown. $10,000. He had pawned something expensive. Maybe his watch. Maybe Martha's jewelry. Then the big one hit. A wire transfer for $150,000. The source was a known hard money lender, a legal loan shark who charged predatory rates. Brandon had signed his life away to get quick cash. They were cannibalizing themselves. They were burning everything they had, taking on massive bad debt, selling assets at a loss, all to pay a lien that didn't exist. They were so blinded by the promise of the $1 million refinance that they were willing to destroy their financial future just to get to it. It was almost 5 o'clock. The deadline Catherine had set was approaching. "They're $10,000 short," I said, doing the math in my head. "Wait for it," Catherine said. At 4:55, a final transfer came through. It was from an account linked to Jerry Shepard. I laughed. A harsh, barking sound. Tiffany had forced her own father to cough up some of the money he had leached off me. She must have threatened him, or maybe promised him a bigger cut of the $1 million. Even the parasites were being forced to pay. "Okay," Catherine said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The funds are aggregated in Brandon's primary checking account. He's setting up the wire to Apex Capital." I held my breath. This was it. If he pushed the button, he was sending $300,000 into a black hole. He was sending it back to me. On the screen, the status changed. Pending, then processing, and finally, completed. $300,000 moved from Brandon's account into the Apex Capital account. Apex Capital, which was wholly owned by the Augustus Waywright Family Trust. Catherine let out a long breath and slumped back in her chair. "We got them, Gus. Cleared. The money is safe." I stared at the screen. The numbers were black and stark against the white background. $300,000. It wasn't the full $850,000 they had stolen, but it was a start. And more importantly, it was money they had bled for. They had sold their boat, maxed their cards, borrowed from sharks, and squeezed their relatives to pay me back. And they didn't even know they had done it. Right now, in my lake house, Brandon and Tiffany were probably popping a bottle of champagne. They thought they had won. They thought they had cleared the title. They thought the path was open for their $1 million cash-out refinance. They thought they were rich. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A distinct, sharp chime. I pulled it out. It was a notification from the Trust's bank app. Deposit received. $300,000. Available. Balance updated. Ting. The sound echoed in the quiet office. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. It was the sound of the first drop of justice falling into an ocean of wrongs. I looked at Catherine. She was grinning, a fierce, victorious look. "What now, Gus?" she asked. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. I felt stronger than I had in months. The cane in my hand felt less like a crutch and more like a scepter. "Send them the lien release," I said. "Let them think they're clear. Let them schedule the closing for their big loan. Let them invite their friends to celebrate." And then I walked to the window and looked out at the city, my reflection staring back at me. I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a man who was ready to take back his kingdom. "Next week," I said, turning back to Catherine. "Next week, they're having a housewarming party. Tiffany posted the invite online. She wants to show off her new mansion to all her high society friends." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You want to crash it?" "No," I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. "I don't want to crash it. I want to host it. It's my house after all. Get the paperwork ready, Catherine. And call the sheriff. We have an eviction to perform." The week that followed was a masterclass in deception. We sent the lien release document just as Catherine had promised. It was a simple piece of paper, officially recorded, that acted like a key unlocking a cage. To Brandon and Tiffany, it was the green light they had been desperate for. It meant the title was clear. It meant the path to their $1 million cash-out refinance was wide open. We monitored their digital footprint and saw the flurry of activity. The loan application was finalized. The appraisal was accepted. The closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. But before the closing, Tiffany needed her victory lap. She needed to show the world, or at least the upper crust of the county's social scene, that she had arrived. She sent out digital invitations for an exclusive housewarming gala. The theme was lakeside elegance. The dress code was cocktail attire. She hired a high-end catering company, a live jazz quartet, and a valet service. She was spending money she hadn't even secured yet, confident that the bank wire was just days away. I spent that week preparing. I didn't go back to the hospital. I didn't go back to the shelter. I stayed in Catherine's guest house, eating well, resting, and regaining my strength. I went to a barber and had my beard trimmed and my hair cut. I went to a tailor Catherine recommended, a quiet man in the city who made suits for senators and judges. I bought a charcoal gray Italian wool suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. I polished my shoes until they shone like mirrors. When I looked in the mirror on the day of the party, the frail, confused old man from Sunny Meadows was gone. In his place stood Augustus Wainwright, the man who had built half this town. The evening of the party was warm and breezy, the kind of perfect summer night that usually brought me peace. As we drove toward the lake, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I wasn't driving my truck. That was gone, sold by my son. I was sitting in the back of a rented Rolls-Royce Phantom, a massive, silent beast of a car that whispered power. Beside me sat Catherine, looking lethal in a sharp black blazer. In the front passenger seat was Sheriff Miller. He wasn't there as a friend. He was there as the chief law enforcement officer of the county, carrying a thick file of arrest warrants and a deep respect for the law. Behind us, 2 black SUVs followed, carrying private security and a few deputies Miller had handpicked for their discretion and loyalty. We turned onto the private road that led to my property. I could see the glow of the party through the trees. The driveway was lined with luxury cars. Land Rovers, Porsches, Mercedes. Tiffany had invited everyone she wanted to impress. The house itself was lit up like a palace. String lights hung from the trees I had planted. Waiters in white jackets circulated with silver trays. The jazz band was playing a smooth, upbeat tune. It looked beautiful. It looked expensive. It looked like a theft in progress. We stopped at the iron gates. A young valet stepped forward, clipboard in hand, looking confused by the convoy. "Name, please?" he asked, peering into the tinted window. Catherine rolled down the glass. "The owner," she said simply. "Open the gate." The valet hesitated, looking at his list. "I don't see an owner on the list, sir. Mr. Wainwright is already inside." "Open the gate, son," Sheriff Miller said, leaning over. "Or I will open it with my bumper." The valet's eyes went wide when he saw the uniform. He scrambled to the keypad and punched in the code. The heavy iron gates swung inward. We rolled up the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched under the heavy tires, a sound that cut through the music. We didn't stop at the valet stand. The Rolls-Royce continued rolling slowly past the stunned guests, right up to the edge of the patio where the main crowd was gathered. The music faltered and then died as the musicians noticed the intrusion. The chatter of the crowd dropped to a confused murmur. All eyes turned toward the driveway. On the raised stone terrace, standing exactly where he had shoved me days before, stood Jerry Shepard. He was wearing a white linen suit that was too tight across the middle, holding a glass of champagne high in the air. He had evidently been in the middle of a toast. Beside him stood Linda, wearing a new dress that probably cost more than my first car, beaming at the crowd. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Jerry boomed, his voice slurring slightly, clearly drunk on power and expensive wine. "But it looks like we have some late arrivals. Probably some VIPs Tiffany forgot to tell me about. As I was saying, when I bought this place I knew it needed a vision. It needed a man who understood luxury. I bought this place." The lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was claiming my work. He was claiming my life. The driver opened my door. I stepped out. My Italian leather shoes hit the pavement with a solid, authoritative click. I stood up to my full height, buttoning my jacket. I didn't need the cane today, but I held it anyway. A silver-headed stick that looked more like a weapon than a crutch. Catherine stepped out beside me. Sheriff Miller stepped out from the front. The deputies from the SUVs fanned out, silent and professional. A hush fell over the party. It wasn't the polite silence of a lull in conversation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of shock. The guests looked from the imposing vehicles to the three of us standing in formation. They didn't know who I was. To them, I was just a stranger in an expensive suit. But Tiffany knew. She was standing near the bar, holding court with a group of women in cocktail dresses. She turned when the music stopped. Her eyes scanned the scene, annoyed at the interruption, until they landed on me. Her face went slack. The flute of champagne in her hand slipped from her fingers. It hit the stone patio with a sharp, crystalline shatter that echoed like a gunshot. Champagne splashed over her designer heels, but she didn't move. She stared at me as if she were seeing a corpse that had clawed its way out of the grave. And Brandon, my son, was standing near the buffet table, laughing at something a friend had said. He turned at the sound of the breaking glass. He looked at his wife, following her gaze to me. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands shaking. "Dad," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper that carried across the silent yard. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. He looked at my suit. He looked at the Rolls-Royce. He looked at the sheriff. This didn't fit the narrative. This wasn't the senile, drooling invalid he had left at Sunny Meadows. This wasn't the pauper he had stripped of assets. "Dad," he said again, louder this time, his voice cracking with fear and confusion. You're supposed to be. I thought you were dead. I mean, the hospital. You're supposed to be in the home." I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unbearable. I let his words hang there, exposing him to everyone present. He had admitted he thought I was locked away. He had admitted he had discarded me. Jerry, realizing the attention had shifted, squinted down from the terrace. "Who is the party crasher?" "Tiff, security. Get them out of here. This is private property." I looked up at Jerry. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I walked toward the terrace stairs. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, guests shrinking away from the cold aura of authority radiating from our group. I climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, the tap of my cane marking time. I reached the top and stood face to face with Jerry. Up close, he smelled of sweat and greed. He looked at me, recognition finally dawning in his watery eyes. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine terror. I reached out and plucked the microphone from his hand. He didn't resist. He was too busy trembling. I tapped the microphone twice. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the speakers, making a few guests jump. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm, deep and steady. "I apologize for the interruption. I know you're all enjoying the hospitality." I swept my gaze across the crowd, making eye contact with the confused socialites. "My name is Augustus Wainwright, and I am the owner of this house." A gasp rippled through the crowd. People began to whisper. Tiffany took a step back, bumping into a waiter. I turned to Brandon, who was now standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me like a condemned man looking at the hangman. "I am not dead, son," I said into the microphone. "And I am not in the home. I am right here, and I have come to collect the rent." My voice boomed across the silent garden. "I'm sorry I'm late. I was busy at the bank, withdrawing the very generous financial gift my son and daughter-in-law just wired to me." The crowd murmured, confused glances exchanging between the guests. Tiffany went pale, her eyes darting from me to the sheriff standing beside me. Brandon looked like he was about to vomit. "Gift," Brandon squeaked. "What gift?" "The $300,000 you sent to Apex Capital yesterday?" I explained, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "You see, Apex Capital isn't a bank. It's a holding company, owned entirely by the Augustus Wainwright Family Trust. By me." Tiffany let out a strangled sound, her hands flying to her mouth. "You stole money from my retirement account," I continued, addressing the crowd now. "You sold my boat. You borrowed from loan sharks. And then you wired every single cent of it right back into my account. You thought you were paying off a lien to clear the title so you could mortgage my house. In reality, you were just returning what you stole, with interest. You tricked us." Tiffany shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "That's fraud. You committed fraud." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. Actually, ma'am, the fraud was committed when your husband forged his father's signature on a quitclaim deed, when he filed a false public record to steal a property worth $1.8 million. And when you conspired with him to do it. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously in the silence. Brandon Wainwright, you are under arrest for first-degree forgery, elder abuse, and grand larceny. Brandon's knees buckled. 2 deputies moved in, catching him before he hit the ground. They spun him around, pulling his arms behind his back. The click of the cuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Dad! Brandon sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Dad! Please tell them it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, son, I said, looking down at him from the terrace. It was a choice. You chose to erase me. You chose to lock me in a cage. Tiffany tried to back away, looking for an exit, but Catherine stepped into her path. And you must be Tiffany, Catherine said, her voice sharp. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And I believe the district attorney is also adding a charge of identity theft. No! Tiffany screamed as a female deputy grabbed her wrist. I paid the $300,000. The house is mine. I have the receipt. That money wasn't a payment for the house, I said coldly. Consider it back rent and compensation for the emotional damage you caused. You paid for your own eviction, Tiffany. While the deputies wrangled the screaming couple, I saw movement near the side gate. Jerry and Linda Shepard were trying to slip away into the shadows, walking fast toward their car. Jerry was carrying a large, heavy bag. Sheriff, I said, pointing the cane, do not let them leave. Deputies intercepted them before they could reach the driveway. Jerry tried to bluster, shouting about his rights, but the deputies ignored him. They opened the bag Jerry was clutching. Inside was my antique mantel clock, the silver candlesticks from the dining room, and a jewelry box containing the rest of Martha's collection. Possession of stolen property, Miller said, shaking his head. And since you entered this property knowing it was obtained through fraud, we're adding criminal trespassing and burglary. They handcuffed Jerry and Linda right there on the lawn. Linda began to wail, her expensive new dress now stained with grass and dirt as she struggled. The party was over. The guests, realizing they were witnessing a crime scene, began to scatter, rushing to their cars to avoid being associated with the scandal. I watched them go. I watched the police cars, flashing their lights, illuminating the facade of the house I had built. They dragged Brandon past me toward the patrol car. He stopped, looking up at me with red, puffy eyes. He looked like a child again, scared and small. Dad, help me, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Please, I'm your son. Don't let them take me. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me to rot in a room with moldy bread. I looked at the man who had let his wife plan to frame him. I felt a deep, aching sadness, but the well of sympathy was dry. I didn't send you to prison, Brandon, I said softly. You sent yourself the moment you signed that deed. You chose your family, son. You chose Tiffany and her parents. You chose them over me, so ask them for help. They shoved him into the back of the car. He slumped against the window, sobbing. I turned away. I couldn't watch anymore. 6 months later, the lake house was sold. It sold for $2.1 million. Ironically, the cosmetic renovations Tiffany had paid for with my stolen money, the painting, the landscaping, the modern fixtures, had increased the value significantly. I took the money. I took the $300,000 they had wired me. I combined it with what was left of my retirement. I didn't buy another house. I didn't want to be tied down to a place that held so many ghosts. Instead, I bought a 45-foot luxury RV. It had a king-sized bed, a full kitchen with granite countertops, and heated floors. It was a palace on wheels. I stood in the dealer lot, looking at the gleaming silver beast. It represented something I hadn't had in 40 years. Total, absolute freedom. I opened the passenger door. Buster, my old golden retriever, hopped in. He had gained weight since I got him back. His coat was shiny again. He settled into the leather seat, wagging his tail, ready for an adventure. I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, a powerful, steady hum. I adjusted the mirrors. I put on my sunglasses. I wasn't Gus, the victim. I wasn't Gus, the old man in the nursing home. I was Gus, the traveler. I pulled out of the lot and turned onto the highway, heading west. The road stretched out before me, endless and open. I was going to see the Grand Canyon. I was going to see the redwoods. I was going to fish in Montana and watch the sunrise in the desert. I had no mortgage. I had no ungrateful children waiting for their inheritance. I had no heavy secrets weighing me down. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, watching the city fade into the distance. I thought about Brandon, sitting in a cell, learning the hard way that character costs more than money. I hoped he would learn. I hoped that one day, years from now, he would understand. But for now, I had a map, a full tank of gas, and my best friend beside me. I smiled, shifting gears. We were going to be just fine. We were free. Sitting in my RV watching the sunset, I realized that blind tolerance is poison to a child's character. I gave Brandon everything, transforming him into a weak, greedy man. When he pushed me to the brink, I had to be ruthless. Letting him go to prison wasn't an act of hatred. It was the final, harsh lesson on responsibility I never taught him before. Never let the word family rob you of your self-respect. The most valuable asset you own isn't a lake house. It is your freedom and your dignity. So, tell me, what would you have done when faced with that kind of betrayal? Have you ever had to draw a line with family, even when it hurt? I really want to know what you think.